Well, welcome to the Coding for Interactive Communication tutorial part 2. I'm Bernard Heupler, I'm at CMU, and well, I'm happy that so many of you are still here. I know it's late. I tried to make this reasonably interactive, and you guys can help by just asking questions, as many as possible. If you don't get all the way to the end of the presentation, that's perfect. Yeah, so I have a bunch of really cool things to show you. So this is roughly the overview of what we're going to do. We just saw we introduced the problem, we saw kind of what are the important parameters, and saw some nice paradigms for getting protocols that are, or simulations that are maximally error resistant. So the things that I want to talk about is what about coding rate? How much redundancy do I need to add? By how much do I need to blow up my protocol to make it robust to some amount of error? And second thing I want to talk about is multi-party setting. In both settings, it's interesting to, well, give protocols that show that we can do certain things, but it's maybe more interesting to show that we have a good grasp on what we cannot do, so to prove some communication complexity lower bounds. And so in both cases, many of the open questions are communication complexity lower bounds, and we have also some results along the slide. So in both cases, I will both give upper bounds and at least some proof ideas and some techniques for communication complexity lower bounds as well. Okay. So just to recap the problem in case you got lost somewhere on the last talk or you just joined in. Quick recap. So what we want to do is error correction for conversations, for interactive protocols, right? And it's really the equivalent of error correcting codes for the one-way setting. So how does this work? Well, in the one-way setting, we have one party Alice and one party Fox. My drawing skills are not that great. And Alice wants to send n bits over, right? So if there's no noise, that's perfect, right? She just sends over the n bits and everything is great. But what if there's some noise in the channel? What if some of these symbols get corrupted? Let's say we have a corruption of 1% of the things the bits get flipped. Right? So then of course Box will be confused, but error correcting codes come to the rescue. We basically just translate these n bits into some larger number of bits, so t over some rate smaller than 1. So think of, for example, the rate being 1/2, then this would be kind of 2t bits. And now, no matter where these errors happen, Box will be able to decode. And for error correcting codes, there's really kind of, if you want to point out two things that matter, the first thing that matters is what's the trade-off between how much redundancy I need to add, by how much do I need to blow up my protocol, and how much errors can I tolerate, right? That's the most important thing. And then maybe the second thing that's important is, can we do the encoding and decoding in some polynomial time? If it's exponential time, then maybe it's not going to be particularly useful, right? But in the first order, second order, and third order, these are the things in error correcting codes that we really care about, okay? And so for error correcting codes, we understand this quite well. So essentially the communication rate for an error fraction epsilon will be somewhere between 1 minus the entropy and 1 minus entropy of epsilon, or 1 minus twice the entropy of epsilon, if we have adversarial errors. So there's still kind of this factor of 2 gap, which we don't know the answer. For random errors, this is Shannon's big result. It's exactly 1 minus h of epsilon. So in general, for adversarial and random errors, it's 1 minus h of epsilon, constant times h of epsilon, which, if the error rate is small, is basically epsilon log 1 over epsilon. And that's amazing, right? In the sense that an epsilon function of the bits get flipped. So they're completely useful. At the very least, we have to send this epsilon fraction of extra bits, right? And what this coding theorem says is that we don't have to send that much more. like a log1 epsilon fraction difference. This is over binary alphabets, over large alphabets, this actually goes. So you essentially only have to put in the redundancy of what was destroyed in a tiny little bit extra, but not much. And in particular, what we're going to be interested in, I mean, one question is, how far can you push it? How large can you make the error rate to still get some non-zero rate where you can still communicate? That was basically the last talk. In this talk, we will mostly care about if the noise is reasonably small. How much do I have to blow up my protocol, right? And what this is saying is, in the one-way setting, as the error rate goes to 0, we also have to put less and less redundancy into our string to make it robust. Okay, cool. So now, what about interactive communication? Well, the same thing, we have a conversation, right? So Alice sends something to Bob, she gets a response back, they go back and forth. If there's no noise and they can have the conversation, that's great. What if anywhere in this protocol, some 1%, some epsilon fraction of the bits get flipped? Can we add some redundancy to this protocol to make it robust to this kind of noise? And this is exactly these interactive coding schemes, and weight is defined by the same in the same way. How much longer do I have to make my protocol to make it robust to these epsilon fraction of errors? And the results that we've seen is basically, well, if the error rate is small enough, so for binary, it's 1/8 is kind of the boundary what we can tolerate. Then we have constant weight codes, constant weight interactive coding schemes. Right? What does constant weight mean? Well, it's some tiny constant, 1/1000, 1/1,000,000, 1/I don't know. And it basically means that if you want to make your conversation robust, you have to do the equivalent of repeating it 1,000,000 times. It's great that it's just a constant. It's better than squared or whatever, but it's still not great. And computational complexity, we talked about it a little bit. The first results are not even computationally efficient. They're exponential. I have exponential time computations. If you by now we understand things a whole lot better. So if you use this tree code protocol. You do some boosting, you do some list decoding, and all of these things will, you apply this recursively, all of these keeps this a constant, but basically will drive it down by a constant every time you do that. So you can imagine how tiny this constant is in the end. Then you can get something that has good computational complexity as well. Right? But it's not going to be simple. And the rate is going to be pretty bad. Okay, so instead, what I want to show you is a very simple interactive coding scheme, which achieves a communication rate of 1 minus square root epsilon, essentially. So it's a log of epsilon, but a square root of epsilon. And you can also make it run in, it's trivially kind of polynomial time. You can make it run in near linear time, and it's super simple. And essentially, you've already seen it in the last talk. But it's not clear that it actually works just on its own, so this is what I want to show you. So here's a simple coding scheme, and I write coding scheme in brackets because it's really not doing any coding. Right? So it's really just this combined error paradigm where we say that let's have our conversation as is. No coding, no tree codes, no error correcting codes, just have the conversation as it is. And every now and then, let's check if you're still on the same page. Okay, if you're on the same page, then great, let's continue. If you're not on the same page, then let's try to backtrack to some kind of state, to some kind of part of the conversation where we were on the same page and continue from there. And it took about, so this is not a kind of new paradigm, but it took 20 years for us to realize that one can actually design protocols that just works like this. It doesn't need any tree codes. It doesn't do anything extra, but just do this. And things get a whole lot easier if you don't have to care, or if you have an alphabet that's larger. Right? So that's so I'm gonna explain this protocol again to you. You've kind of seen it before for a large alphabet size, and then we will talk about why it looks really hard to make the alphabet size small, but how we can actually still do it. But this is how the protocol more or less looks like. And I'm just, this is kind of the easy variant, but any intuitions that we get from this protocol will carry directly over to the real thing. Okay. So this is the protocol. It's super easy. It's basically straightforward writing down more formally what I said before. So what is it doing? Well, we have a bunch of iterations. We keep repeating things. In each iteration, what we do is we have the original conversation for some B rounds. The B is a parameter that we will choose. That we choose. So in this case, it's square root of epsilon. So if you think of 1% corruption rate, then we do this for 10 rounds. Right? Square root of 1 over as 1% is 1 over 100. Square root of that is 1 over 10. So for 10 rounds, we have the conversation as is. And then we try to see if we're on the same page. What does it mean? Well, we sample some random bits, some random seeds. We send over the seed the hashed transcript according to this random seed, and also the length of our transcript so far. And this is what we send over. We receive the same thing from the other side. And then we check whether the hashes match. And so in particular, I take what I got from the other side. Supposedly the seed was this, might have been corrupted. Supposedly the hash was this, might have been corrupted. But if there was no corruptions, then I would expect that if I recompute the hash with the seed on my transcript, then it should match what came from the other side. If it doesn't match, then either the hashes got corrupted or we're not on the same page. If you're not on the same page, then we just remove we ignore the last B steps that we have just computed. And the deeper person, or if you're on the same devs, will backtrack one extra B steps. That's the whole problem. Does it make sense? Right? It's really just have the conversation as is for a specific amount of time, send some hashes, check whether we're on the same page. If we seem to be not on the same page, backtrack. Okay. So the only thing that's maybe not quite intuitive is this thing here. Why do we need to check who's deeper and why should there be a difference in who backtracks? Yes. So what we do is we sample a random seed, we hash our transcript and send it over. And then the other side will take the same seed, hash its transcript, which is the same seed, and look whether the outcome is the same. And if there's no corruptions, then if there's no corruption and we are on the same page, then everything is good. So the only thing that's maybe not quite so intuitive is why do we send the lengths and why do we have this length comparison? And the basic reason is this. Doing the protocol, because we have adversarial errors, we can get arbitrarily long out of step. Right? It could be that one person is walking down, constantly receiving everything in this case, the hashes match, the hashes match, and we walk down, the other person is way higher. That's perfectly possible. So now, even if nothing happens and we just keep backtracking on both parties whenever something's not happening, we backtrack by the same amount, what would happen is this, right? In the beginning, we really backtrack the parts where we disagree, which is great. But now we are on the same path, it's just one person is deeper than the other. The transcripts will still not match. Now, if both parties backtrack the same amount in every round to fix that, they will just chase each other until they're back at the very beginning of the problem. Right? So this is the one reason why we have this extra conditioning here for the deeper party backtracks. Questions? Awesome. Cool. Okay. So I think if you see this at first, it's maybe actually very counterintuitive why this should work against adversarial errors. Right? Because the adversary can arbitrarily mess with these hashes. It can make hashes match where they totally don't match. It can fool you for a really long time, and somehow I claim at the end we will still be correct. Right? How can that be? The trick is these rounds here are fairly small. Right? So if you think about it, if you have an error rate of 1%, then the adversary gets to corrupt 1 in 100 rounds. But our rounds are only 10 long. So it only gets to corrupt every 10th round. So if on average, in a round, we do the right thing if nothing bad happens, which 9 out of 10 rounds has to be the case. And if you don't screw up too badly, if you receive an error, then generally you should be walking into the right direction. That's the intuition. And one can make this intuition formal in a fairly straightforward way by finding a potential, which is basically saying, measuring how much progress have we made so far. Okay? What's the progress that we have made so far? Well, it's the number of blocks that we agree. And then there's the blocks where we disagree, where we diverge. Those we'll have to backtrack. Those we have to work extra hard to make them go away. So those should count negative in our potential. So write down the potential, which is basically just the number of blocks where we agree minus the number of blocks where we disagree. And then it's fairly easy to prove that if we have an iteration with no error, then our potential increases, because we either backtrack or we walk forward if we're on the same page. And since we never move too far, we only move constant number of blocks in any round, regardless of what the hashes tell us, regardless of how much interference is said by the adversary. It's clear that we will never screw up by more than a constant in one round. Cool. So I claim this already gives us correctness. Why? Because in the end, every round by default gives us one round of progress according to this potential. And in an epsilon fraction of the round, so this whole protocol will not run longer than 1.1 n rounds, so 1.1 times epsilon is the maximum number of errors that we can have. In those number of rounds, instead of going 1 forward, we go 3 backwards, so the potential will decrease by 4 only this often. And by choosing the number of iterations just a tiny little bit larger, so kind of n rounds in total, the potential in the end will be at least the total length in number of blocks, and that means we are correct, right? Because this positive potential can only come from the blocks where we agree, because this only contributes negatively. So we agree until the very end of the protocol. So that proves correctness, and it's basically just using the fact that most of the blocks need to be correct, because you choose a block small enough. You choose a block smaller than 1 over epsilon. Okay. So the last thing is, what's the rate that we get from this? And well, you just calculate the number of rounds that we need times the number of iterations that we have times the number of rounds of each iteration, which since we chose such that we get correctness in the end. The number of rounds that we have is B to have the talking part and kind of 2 rounds for the hashing. You multiply it out, you get this, and you end up with this choice of B, you end up with this square root of epsilon. It's 1 plus square root of epsilon. So that's the whole proof of correctness. The only place where we didn't cheat, but where we used an assumption that we would like not to use is the fact that we're using words here, the fact that we're using an alphabet which is of size log k instead of a constant size alphabet. If you're willing to make this, then this is a complete protocol, a complete proof for adversarial error. Does it make sense? Cool. Okay. So why did it take? I mean, this is nothing that. This is something that people use, but then they used it in addition with tree codes and other more complicated stuff. Why? So what's so hard about going from words to making this work over constant size alphabet? Right? Why did it take so long until we realized that this is actually all? Well, the problems are, there's basically 2 problems. One is, if you have adversarial noise, it gets n epsilon corruptions. It can fool us completely in any formal way for n. It can even play man in the middle for n epsilon number of rounds. It can make Alice believe something and Bob something completely else and lead us away in arbitrary directions, right? For something that's linearly low. On the other hand, if you have a constant size alphabet, the block size we cannot make larger than 1 over epsilon, because otherwise every block could have one error in it and would never make progress. So the blocks we need to be small, and this means we can only use a constant number of bits for the hashing, if you want it over constant size alphabet. Before that we had a log k alphabet, and everything is fine and easy, or constant size alphabet is a whole lot harder. So you can only use a constant number of bits for this check. So where does this make a problem? If you go back to the protocol, where do we use the fact that we're sending a lot of things? Here, right? This part and this receiving part, we would like it to be just a constant number of bits. What are we sending here? We're sending the hash as a seed, the hash and the length. All of these are logarithmically long. So if you think about the seed length, how many bits of randomness do we need to hash the transcript? How much of the transcript do we need to hash? At least n epsilon of the transcript, because this is how far we could be away from each other. So the latest error might be n epsilon far away. How many bits of randomness do we need to hash an order n long string? Log n bits. It's very easy to see that you cannot do it with less than log n bits of randomness. Otherwise there will be seeds which always looks the same for every seed, if you don't have seeds that are at least log n bits. So it seems the seed length has to be at least log n. That's already a big no. Right? So the second thing is this depth coordination. How do we avoid the fact that we are chasing each other up? Well, we need to find out who of us is steeper. Well, if you have log n bits to send, it's easier, send you my depth. How do we find who of us is steeper if you have only a constant number of bits to send? Again, that seems pretty hard. And the last thing, also hash size. Here we can make the hash size, so originally we made the hash size, the output of the hash function, logarithmic, and with high probability we don't have hash collisions. If you make it a constant, then even if the hash is perfectly random, the fact then two transcripts will look the same under this hash function is constant probability. So then you get a constant fraction of hash collisions, which again looks pretty bad. Right, so on all of these three things, it looks like constant size alphabet is really hard or impossible. So I'm going to give you a quick flavor of what you can do to actually still make this work. I'm not going to go into the detail, but I think it's going to be relatively clear. Okay, so three things: seed length, hash size, and depth coordination. Okay. So the most interesting parts happen in the seed length and in the hash size. Okay. So for the seed length, we want to have some randomness. For one round, we need log n bits of randomness, but we can only send order 1 across. Okay. So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is instead of generating new randomness in each round, we're going to first generate all the randomness in advance, send it over with an error correcting code, and then use this pre-shared randomness. If we would use the same amount of randomness, then that's, whether we send it first or we send it in each round, it wouldn't actually make a difference. So one thing that we use in addition to that is we use a pseudo-random generator to stretch this randomness. Okay, so essentially what we can show is that, yes, in one round we need log n bits, but we don't need log n independent bits for every round. It's enough if there's less independence between different rounds in the randomness that we use. So what we do is we share a small amount of randomness, send it over with an error correcting code in the beginning, then stretch it to be a longer amount of randomness, which is not perfectly independent, but independent enough for our purposes. And we use these things called approximate limited independence, independent spaces. Super useful standard tool, also very useful. The one thing that's problematic here is, the crucial thing about hashing is that you first determine which are the things that we're hashing, and then you choose the seed randomly, independently of what you're trying to hash. Right? It's very easy to cause hash collisions if I know which seed you have. If you're sending all the randomness across the channel in the beginning, the adversary knows the randomness. How can it be that he cannot just choose his hash collisions accordingly? An oblivious, if it's a random channel or an oblivious channel, then that's fine. He will not know the randomness because he is oblivious. But if he's adversarial, if he gets to see what's sent over the channel and adjust to it, that's a problem. Okay. How does one get around this? Well, essentially we just prove this works for oblivious channels with very high probability, exponential in n, and then take a big union bound over all possible adversaries. So no matter what oblivious adversarial strategy the adversary adaptively chooses, the probability that it succeeds is so small that for a random string, for a random string there's not going to be a single oblivious strategy which works. Questions about this point? So this brings the seed length down to basically a constant in each round. Okay, so what about the hash size? If you have small hashes, then the probability of a hash collision is large. Okay? But the crucial thing to see is hashing only makes one-sided errors. What do I mean with this? What can go wrong with hashing is I have two transcripts which are not the same, and the hashes collide and we think they are the same. That's an error, that's bad. But what will never happen is that we have two transcripts that are the same, and we hash them, and the hash says they're not the same. This can never happen. Right? So it's only in one direction that we make errors. But how often do we actually expect to have different transcripts? I claim that if we shouldn't expect to have more than an epsilon fraction of the time to have a different transcript. Epsilon t many blocks we have here different transcript. Why? Because every time we have a different transcript, we're going to backtrack. If this happens too often, then anyway we're not going to have a good rate. Right? So just by the fact that we managed to walk all the way through and we use a very small number of extra rounds, means we can't have too many rounds where the transcripts are actually in disagreement. Right? So there are not too many rounds where our hashes are actually able to make an error. Because in the rounds where the transcripts are the same, the hashes are not gonna make a problem. So even if we have a constant detection rate, it causes only epsilon t many extra errors, and this is exactly the amount that the adversary has anyway. So we can treat hash collisions just as kind of some extra adversarial corruptions. It's going to be the same order of magnitude. It's not going to be a problem. Adaptivity is the same problem as here, and this is actually where the log 1 over epsilon terms come, or square log 1 over epsilon term comes in the rate. For fully adaptive adversaries, and interestingly enough, this is not just a glitch of the analysis where we don't know how to do it better, we just threw in some extra log factors. I claim this is actually tight. Like the square root of log 1 over epsilon factor, as weird as it looks, this is actually necessary, and this is the best thing we can do. Not going to go too much into depth coordination. Yeah, that skips that. So those are kind of the two interesting parts, and basically you can make this framework, backtrack if there's an error framework with constant size hashes. And kind of making the hashes constant size is where all the work goes in. The framework itself, the algorithm itself, is going to be exactly this 10-line, super simple, straightforward algorithm that we saw on the other side. Okay, so we have this square root of epsilon, 1 minus square root of epsilon protocol. Is it good? Is it bad? I mean, it's a whole lot better than anything that we had before, in the sense that it's simple, you can implement it, and as the noise rate goes to 0, the overhead goes to 0 as well. Right? So that's great. But now that we have it, we can ask, can we get something better? And one thing that's a little sad is there's this quadratic gap between, so basically in the one-way case we said we have an epsilon log 1 of epsilon. So essentially you only need to send the amount of extra bits that you need that were corrupted. Maybe with a small extra log 1 of epsilon factor or more. But you essentially only send this, like if 1% is corrupted, then you have to replace 1% plus a little bit extra of redundancy into your protocol and you're going to be fine. Here we have to have square root of epsilon, extra bits. So instead of 1% and a little bit extra, it's going to be 10% a little bit extra. And if the error rate gets even smaller, then this gap becomes wider and wider. So is this, why is this gap actually there, or is this just because our analysis is not good enough? So where does the square root of epsilon actually come from? Well, it came from this calculation. We chose this fee and we calculated it out, and well, it just came out if you calculated it. I claim this is actually a very intuitive reason for where this come from, so, and what this calculation down here means. And it's essentially the following. So if you hash every b steps, then we're already going to have, just because we said a rate loss of 1 over b. And if every 10 steps you have one extra round in which you send information which is not recording the protocol but just redundancy, then you lose a rate of 1 over 10. Right? 1 over 10 is just going to be hashes. It's not going to be any interesting information. Even if there's no error, you're going to lose this amount of rate. So this means you want to make b as large as possible. Right? To make the amount of rates if you lose to be as small as possible. But on the other hand, if you hash too infrequently, if you have, on average, if your hashes are b apart, and an error happens in between, then an error will get undetected for all the b rounds. It will, even if it's random, not even adversarial, it will probably lie in the middle. And from there on, your conversation will derail and be completely useless. So, how much rate do you lose because of that? Epsilon times speed. Because whenever an error happens, which is an epsilon fraction of the time, you will have all the b amount of communication, which is completely useless until you catch it. And even if you perfectly backtrack to the exact same spot where you correct, once you catch it, you lose epsilon times. Right? So this means you want to hash fairly frequently. Now, if you balance between the two, you really want to minimize something like constant times 1 over b and constant times epsilon times b. And you're asking what's the best b that you can choose. And maybe I should have, not written this here, but how do I choose b to balance these two things out? Well, these two things should be approximately equal, and you end up with b equal to 1 over the square root of epsilon and the square root of epsilon bar. Right? If you make it too small, then you hash too often and you lose rate because of that. If you make it too large, then a lot of communication is going to be useless because you don't catch errors. And this, I claim, is tight. Okay? So it seems like this is really just saying something, well, with this type of algorithm, we cannot do better. Right? It seems like, why does an algorithm have to do this hashing? Why does it have to do backtracking? We've seen algorithms that look very, very, very different, tree code-based things which don't do this. We claim this can actually be formalized to say that you cannot do better than square root of epsilon. And essentially, with a few caveats, this has already been done by Cole and Rambas. Okay, so just to give you a flavor of how this looks, if you want to actually make this a lower bound which works for all protocols and not just for these like special hashing type protocols, here's how it looks. You use so essentially so this one I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm going to go into like a lower bound proof later on which has a similar flavor, but just as an intuition, how does this work? Essentially one proves that parties have to go through the conversation in order. You cannot tell me about an edge that's really deep down if you don't know what the first edge is. And this seems like the most intuitive and simplest thing. This is the hardest part to prove. But once you have this, think of a simulation in blocks of length 1 over the square root of epsilon. Now, in one just block of 1 over the square root of epsilon, you can measure the entropy that a party tells me about his input, which I don't know. If this entropy is deficient kind of by some constant fraction number of bits in this block, you've already lost, the algorithm has already lost rate. Right? If he wastes 0.01 bits on redundancy, if the amount of information, entropy that he tells me about his input is 0.01 bits less than what it should be, which is basically, if you would just tell me every bit being something full entropy, then we already have a rate loss of 1 square root of epsilon for this block. We're happy, we continue with our induction, we're done for this block. What if a block has less than this number of bits of redundancy? Well, then there is a non-negligible probability that there's an error. Even if the errors are random, there's a probability of square root of epsilon that there is an error in this protocol. So the length is 1 over square root of epsilon, and each round has an epsilon probability of there being error, so epsilon times 1 over square root of epsilon. There's a square root of epsilon probability that there's an error. And the crucial part is if you don't tell me enough extra bits, then there's a constant probability that we do not catch this error. So this is, so this is something that needs to be proven. But if you do not catch this error, and then we're going to lose basically a constant fraction of this block. So with probability order square root of epsilon, we're going to lose a constant fraction of the block, which is of length 1 over square root of epsilon. So again, we're going to lose a constant fraction of a bit in this block. We're done. And so this is also kind of corresponds to hashing a lot or hashing too little. Either way you're screwed. Even though it's not talking about hashing anymore, it's just talking about information quantities. Just as a mark, if you actually look into this, what Cole and Russ do is they prove square root of epsilon log 1 over epsilon lower bound, which seems strange because it seems to contradict the fact that this is square root of epsilon coding scheme. It seems to prove a lower bound, which is an impossibility result, which is stronger than the possibility results that I showed you. The reason for this is that they use a non-alternating input protocol. Okay, and for those, turns out in hindsight that at least we strongly believe that you're not just going to lose something that depends on the noise rate, but you're actually always going to lose a constant rate. So it's true. It's not the strongest result that can be proven. It doesn't contradict what I've shown you before. It's just it doesn't quite hold for these alternating protocols. Yes.
The conjecture, is that for adversarial channels? Because did they have the magic upper bound for random errors?
No. Also, no. Even for random errors, even if it's just a single error, and I tell you after you've committed to how you're going to simulate it, I tell you where this error is. I claim that you lose a constant. Even if it's randomly placed, it's just a erasure, it's just a single one. It's just, I mean, if you have non-alternating protocol and a fixed simulation order, you're in trouble. So that's why they can prove something stronger should be true, but the whole technique is is spot on, and that's what's interesting. Okay, so let's wrap this up, this part. So here's basically what you've seen, and just to put it down in a quick table. So essentially, if you have an alternating input protocol, which is maybe the simplest and cleanest things that we can do, then for random errors, and actually more stronger for oblivious errors, computationally bounded channels, we get this 1 square root of epsilon that I showed you. Only for the case where we have a general non-alternating input protocol and we fix the simulation order, we have to lose a constant. Right? I mean, we know how to lose a constant, but can you lose a constant by just making an alternating that loses you a factor of 2, and then you can use whatever else and claim this is necessary. If you have adversarial errors, fully adaptive adversaries, then you pick up this log 1 over epsilon, and this is square root, and everything else stays the same. So all of these three pick up log 1 over epsilon, and I conjecture that all of these rates are optimal. So I claim that this up to the constants hidden here is the truth. Absolute truth and nothing but the truth. Right? Even with this weird square of log on a web, which seems super strange. But yeah, so proving this would be awesome. And essentially it shouldn't be that much different than using this framework. Okay. Questions about this two-party case, because I'm going to move on to multi-party afterwards. Distance. So to some extent, this corresponds to well, adversarial errors really correspond to distance, right? So random errors, corresponds to random errors in the channel. If you're asking about codes with good distance, then it doesn't matter where these errors are, right? You can think of an adversary placing the errors or worst case error sequences. So these rates really corresponds. This corresponds to distance, quote distance type of results. The random error results correspond to kind of capacity under BSC or other, like under random channels. Yeah. So, but yeah, most of the things that I've done go really distance versus these things work for any error pattern, for worst case error patterns. Other questions? Sweet. Okay. So then let me switch gears and go to the multi-party setting. Multi-party setting, instead of kind of having two parties who talk to each other and there's noise, now we have many parties. We have a whole network of nodes who talk to each other, and there might be noise, and can be kind of still makes these network protocols robust to noise. That's the question. So here's the model. It's super clean and nice. A network is just an undirected graph. Okay, so we have symmetric links. The number of nodes I call n. Number of parties is n. It's synchronous. It's a synchronous model. So this rounds, and in each round, each node sends a symbol, or in this case, a bit, from one along to each of its neighbors. Right. So in each round, x2 is going to send a bit to x1, x4, and x3. x4 is going to send a bit to x2 and x3. And in the noisy settings, they're going to compute something. Right? So it turns out that this is exactly the congest model with message size 1. Right? So this is what POTC, disk, all the theory of distributed computing communities, this is the models they use. So this is C standard model for distributed computing, with the difference that they don't use constant size messages, but they use log size messages. Okay. So, and then you can ask, I don't know, let's compute a maximal independent set, or let's compute, many different things you can compute in this model, maybe even sub-diameter time, right? Let's say the network is large, and in log square time, log in time, you can compute maximal independent set. So now, can you still compute this maximal independent set if there's noise, if the bits that you're sending get flipped? And here, in this setting, it really makes mostly sense to look at random errors, because for adversarial errors, the adversary could just walk down on one link and maybe disconnect a node from the network, and so you can't hope to tolerate too many adversarial errors. But what about random errors? What if every bit that's being sent gets flipped with some constant probability? Can you make your distributed protocol robust to noise? I think it's a pretty cool question. And again, we're going to care about the rate, and there's a beautiful theorem by Rajagopalan and Schulman from the 90s, which says, yes, you can. So if you have a T-round multi-party protocol over any graph, then you can simulate it against a constant fraction, like constant probability of random errors, by blowing the number of rounds up by a factor of yes, so I think this should really be log delta times t, so the rate is going to be 1 over delta. So you need to blow up the number of rounds by a log delta factor.
It's times.
Yeah, it's times not over. So where delta is the maximum degree in the graph. So if you have a constant degree graph, you can do it with this constant rate. It's awesome. Right? And generally, the rate can be as bad as 1 over log n, where n is the number of parties. You can also make this computationally efficient by using these potent tree codes or SSC. So this is kind of the big achievability result. And the question is, how tight is this? So the rates that we get is basically 1 over log delta. So you see the maximum degree is highest and it gets worse and worse. Does it need to get worse? Or is it maybe true that for any topology we can get a constant rate protocol? Right? So I'm going to show you some upper bounds and lower bounds. It's going to be a few more fun. Questions about the model, maybe? Yeah.
So if you have like two parties communicating on the same edge, is it like both of the bits are flipped independently, or like if one's flipped, both are flipped?
So flipped independently, yeah. That's the simplest model. Yeah. It doesn't matter. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't. But yeah, I think the way it's looked here, every bit is flipped independently. Okay, cool. So so here's the first small result. Nogalan, a bunch of us showed that no, it's not always tight. So in particular, on the complete graph, where the previous result would say the maximum degree is n, so you might have a kind of a rate of 1 over log n. You can do better. Right? On the complete graph, I claim you can get a constant rate protocol. And I'm not sure how much time do I have left. Yeah, so I started this too late.
40 minutes.
40 minutes. Okay, so then I'll show you the stuff, but I go over it somewhat quicker, I guess. So for the complete graph, we can do this, and actually this result, and you'll see why it also extends to kind of reasonably dense, well-connected graphs. It's not just for the complete graph, but for a larger class of graphs. And here's roughly how it works. So what we want to do is, we want to simulate one round of the original protocol by a constant number of rounds in the model with noise. And the first subroutine that we're going to use is in constant number of rounds. I want to convince you that I can send square root of n strings of length square root of n to square root of n different destinations. Okay, so that's the first kind of subroutines that we're going to use. And how do we do this? Well, so this is what we want to achieve, right? Each node should be able to send the square root of n different destinations, but a larger string. Instead of 1 bit, they get to send square root of n bits. How do we do this? We just relay. So instead of sending to that node directly, I send the square root of n bits one by one to a bunch of different nodes. And those nodes forward it to the destination. And because we forward only over passes of length 2, it has a constant probability of getting flipped here, constant probability of getting flipped here, but overall it's still just a constant probability that it gets flipped. And so if I first encode whatever I want to send in an error correcting code, and then send these coded bits over, then I can correct for these bit flips. Because I have strings that are long, right? Long strings we know how to correct. These bit by bit is really hard to correct. So we just make the strings longer and then by relaying send them over. Questions about this? Probably not. Right? Makes sense. So now, how do we go from here? So what we have is we have these longer strings to a smaller number of destinations. How do we actually make it again to reliably transmit 1 bit to all of the destinations? Well, we just apply this trick twice. Okay. So here's what we're doing. Write down all the parties in this big matrix and carve out these squared by squared of n submatrices. Okay. Number these with by 1 through n. So each of the parties is responsible for one of these submatrices. And what's going to happen is this party is going to be responsible to relay all the communications between these square root of n times square root of n parties. So anything that goes from somebody with a number less than square root of n to somebody with a number less than square root of n, it's going to get routed through P1. And so on. Right? So in particular, in the first step, all the guys in the rows are sending their information to the guy who's responsible. That's going to be square root of, I mean, how many guys do you need to send it to? Well, square root of n many. How many bits do you need to send? Square root of n bits. You can use our subroutine. Perfect. In the second round, you know, the PI sent to the column forwarded to every, they have collect everything in the submatrices and they forwarded to the parties that need it. Just applies the same procedure twice in it. So for the complete graph, so for constant degree graphs, we're good. In general, we get 1 over the max degree. But that's not always tight. For the complete graph, for example, and other well-connected graphs, we can get a constant. So still the question is, does the rate actually depend on the topology? Or is there a constant rate scheme for every topology? And the answer is no, there is no constant rate scheme for any topology. And in general, up to log factors, this 1 over the max degree is tight. Okay? And that's much more interesting. I mean, to some extent, this is a much harder and much more interesting statement because this is proving an impossibility result, right? So this is proving a communication complexity law. Okay. So what is a bad topology? Well, first thing, it should have high degree, because otherwise the Schulman protocol would work. It should not be well connected, because otherwise our protocol would work. So what's a good topology that has a high max degree and yes?
Star graph?
Yes, the star graph, right? So you have a star network, 1 node is high degree, but it's very much not well connected. And also I think it's just an interesting topology on its own right because it has a very natural interpretation. Basically, there's one server who's connected to n clients, and there's some kind of computation happening there, right? So on its own right, from a more practical perspective, I think this is a very interesting topology. So what is the coding rate in this setting? So as before, for the two-party case, we're basically gonna go to this pointed jumping protocol and just define kind of one generic, like write down what's the most generic way of computations that can happen and write it down in this kind of tree structure. And it's basically very similar to what we had before, just except that for one tree we're gonna have a bunch of trees. Right? So in particular, how this, I mean, you could work this out on your own, I'm sure if I give you 5 minutes, but so how is this gonna look like? Each client gets a binary tree, right? Because for the client, it still looks like each round I receive a bit and I send a bit, I receive a bit, I send a bit. Binary tree. Looks like it's a two-party case. For each client, we have a different tree. The server is a little bit more interesting. In each round, it receives n bits. So there's 2 to the n different possibilities. So we have the 2 to the n RE tree. And then it needs to send an output to each of the servers. So it needs to do, basically there's going to be strings of length n, which specifies what it sends to each of the servers. And so what's the meaning of this? We follow this path according to the client messages, and then the label that's on this thing is going to be the ICE label, is going to the ICE bit on the label is going to get sent to the ICE client. So I think it's pretty straightforward, but maybe a quick example is still helping at this time of the day, right? So here we have 2 clients which have a binary tree, and we have a server which has a 4-array tree with 2 bits labels on each of these lines. So the protocol starts with the client sending some information. So they send bit, the first bit is, let's say, 0 and 1, so they send this over. And I guess this corresponds to this edge here. So the server knows this is the edge that's important, and it's going to send, oh, I guess messed that up. So I guess 0, 1 is the second edge, so this says the edge, but then it should send a 0 here and a 1 here, or differently, this should have been a 1, 0. But yeah, so it's sending the response according to to this label here, back to the service. Say look at what do they receive, just like in the binary case, and they get a response, which is the label here. So they send a 0, 0, and 0, 0 corresponds to this edge. So the server is going to send the response of 1, 0. And you just walk down this path, and in the end you end up at a leaf, and this is what you want to compute. Right? Each of the parties end up as a leaf, and this is what we want to compute if there's noise. Okay. So let's think of upper bounds. Like what are things that we can do to solve this with noise? Okay. So if we can execute k steps of the protocol in k prime steps with error, and we can make the error inverse proportional for the number of, we say, number of parties that we have, then we can just repeat this over and over and get a rate of k over k prime. If every k prime steps, we can execute k steps. That's going to be good. So one thing that's very obvious is, well, actually, maybe what's the thing that's very obvious to whoever paid attention might have seen it already, but what's help me out? How can I make each bit gets flipped with constant probability? How can I make it reliable?
Send two log n bits. So
yeah, I just repeated log n times, right? So if I can have one step be reliable by just repeating it log n times. So k is equal 1, k prime is equal log n, and this gives me a trivial rate of 1 over log n, right? Which we would also get kind of for this topology from logical Polanyi. So the question is, can we do better? And yes, the answer is actually we can. So I'm trying to prove a little one, but it's good to understand how we can do better. Well, if you already have log n rounds in which we're going to send something over and over, you might as well send log n bits and use an error correcting code. So instead of sending one bit over and over, let's take k levels of the tree and flatten it out by basically sending you all the possibilities that there are. Each of the clients can do that. And use an error correcting code to send this over to the server. Now the server gets to see for every client the next k steps. For any possible answer, for any possible things that he sends, he gets to see what they would be doing. So in his head, he can just calculate what the whole protocol is going to look like for the next k steps and send the correct path of length k to each of the clients. Okay. The problem is, of course, this here blows up exponentially in k. So what are some good parameters to choose? Well, let's choose k equal log n. Right? If you flatten a tree of depth log n, then how many bits of information, how many edges are in this kind of small subtree? Log n, right? It's 2 to the, it's a binary tree. If you go log depths down, then it's going to be log n edges. So we really just need to send log n bits. And we can transmit log n bits in order log n bounds reliably using an error correcting code. Okay, just to have something of constant distance, and we're going to get concentration, and so with high probabilities this is going to go through. So what does this mean? Well, in log n bounds, in log n bounds, I can make progress of the order of log n. So we get a rate of log n over log n. And so we have a protocol that's slightly better for the star graph than what logical Polanyi would give us, but only by a log factor. Now, can we do even better? And now the answer is no. This is the best. So, and in particular, this is the first communication complexity low bound in this context where we get a super constant slowdown. Where we can prove that we cannot achieve a constant rate. And it's nearly tight. It's basically, well, if 1 over log n would be tight with the log n, it's not tight. In fact, we don't know of any examples where so it might very well be that the lower bound is tight and the upper bound is not. The possibility result is not. At least we don't have an example where you actually need monolog. You can't say this as well. Okay. So the rest of the talk I will go a little bit more on how do you actually prove these impossibilities, because that's something that's notoriously hard. And the last bounds that I gave you, I hand waved a lot. So here I'm still going to hand wave a bit, but I'm going to make it a whole lot more precise. And you'll see the parallels between this lower bound and what I showed you on the other side. And you can, yeah. So the spirit is still the same. So the rest of the talk is going to be some more high-level proof ideas on how to actually prove these communication complexity. Okay. So here's the form of theorems that we want to prove. If you have a coding scheme of a binary T-round protocol in a star network with n nodes, then there are some protocols for which, or in general, a simulator cannot be faster than, cannot have a blow-up of less than log n over log n. And for the stars, this is tight. What is the protocols that we're going to be using? We're just going to use pointer jumping protocols that I had before. This random, all of the edges are going to be random. Right? For each node, there's going to be a uniformly random pick, whether you go to the left or to the right. And this result actually doesn't hold just for bit flips, but it also holds for erasures, and it's basically you just replace it with a question mark. And it's easier to prove for those as well. And maybe as a last remark, we do get a tight blow up of t times log n, so without this log n, if we go to alphabets of size logarithmic or polylogarithmic. So here it's actually a case where larger alphabet size make your life harder. And why is this? Because the flattening of the tree is, you can't go terribly far down if the tree is not binary, but it's 2 to the polylog large. So you can only flatten it down to a constant level. So so for the model that the distributed community cares about, which is exactly kind of log n here, we actually get a tight result.
Does your lower bound apply to randomized protocols as well?
Yes.
So the expectation is taken over like randomness of the channel, randomness of the inputs, and randomness of the players?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions about the result? So here's the general idea, and it's kind of it's very intuitive. If a player doesn't know on which pass in the tree he is, he can't really provide any useful information about things that are further down. If I don't know what the answer to the first question is, I cannot give you information about the third, fourth, or even deeper edges intuitively. So you have to, that's a different way of saying you kind of have to do it top down. Of course, this is not completely true. Right? With an exponential blow up, I can actually tell you about everything at once. I tell you about everything. And so it's not true that I can know nothing. That I cannot provide you anything is completely useless. It's just not as useful as it should be. I can also just guess kind of a pass and tell you, well, I guess this would be my answer. It's probably that you guess it right. It's small, but there's still a non-negligible probability. So how do we actually make this formal? Well, we use information theory. Right? So we define what does it mean to know, what does it mean to make progress, and so on. Just like before, we phrase it in terms of entropy and information theory. So let's make it a little bit more precise, right? So this absolute statement, I can do nothing, and everything is going to be useless unless I know exactly where I am, can of course not be true. So what we want to say is, if a player doesn't know much, and well, we need to know much, then every information that it tries is not going to be completely useless, but almost useless, even if we have some prior communication, before. And really, one crucial thing in making this work is really to define formally what does it mean to make progress. So here's how we define how we know things, and here's how we define progress. The information about a random variable x is basically just the information content that it has, like the It's the number of bits you need to specify when it's completely random, so log of the support size, minus the amount of entropy that we have about it. Right? So initially, if you know nothing about an n-bit string, it's n bits. If I told you some information about it, and you can write, kind of specify it as less than n bits afterwards, but because you know something, then this information is going to be for uniformly strings, this is going to be, the entropy is going to be the full entropy, and this is going to be the full entropy, so we have zero information about it. And as this goes further and further away from uniform, you know more and more about it, so you have the information I of x actually increases. Okay, so now, how do we define progress? Well, we define this cutoff, which is the minimal level k, where we know almost nothing about the subtree that dangles off the correct path at depth scale. Right? So at this point there is some correct path, and we can look at the subtree at this point, and we want to say that we have not made progress beyond depth k. This one looks almost uniform to us, if we know nothing about it. So in particular, the smallest k such this subtree specifies by the correct graph if the information that you have about it is small. So it's kind of the, I mean, you plug in kind of parameters for what is small, but this is pretty close to the formal definition of cutoff. So this is how much progress we have. If you know a significant amount have a significant amount of information about this, then this is not the cutoff. Now, this is definition. This is what is the main argument. We're gonna progress in steps of, some say constant times log n, small constant times log n, and we look how much progress can we make on the cutoff. And we want to claim that the expected progress is less than log n. That's kind of story. Very much along the lines of what we had before. And why is this the case? Well, in the small constant times log n bound, we claim there's going to be a good number of claims which never get to talk, which just get unlucky and get an erasure every single time in these runs. Okay? So if I run, let's say, with probability 1/2, client gets erased. If I run for 0.1 log n once, what's the probability that a specific client gets erased every single time? Yeah.
1 over n to the 0.1.
1 over n to the 0.1. Right? So it's a small polynomial. So what's the expected number of clients which never get to talk during this run?
0.9.
Yeah, it's like n to the 0.9. Right? And these are all independent. So actually, we're going to have this very high probability, not a large fraction, but a large number of clients never get to talk during these runs. Right? If you would make this 2 log n, then everybody would definitely get to talk. With high probability, everybody would get to talk at least once. But if you make it a small log n, then there's going to be like a fully known number of clients which never get to talk at all. Big difference. Right? And so once we have this, once we know that many clients are shut out, then the server has no information about what's the next step for these, n to the 0.9 for these really many clients is below the current cutoff. And it can really not say anything, like it could be any of these 2 to the point n 0.9 different possibilities. And which one is the right one, the server doesn't know. So it can give the client limited information below the cutoff. And the clients can give information, but how much information? Well, it goes most log n per round because this is for many rounds we run. But without the server giving them any information, this is not going to be particularly useful. And in particular, kind of intuitively, the best they can do is flatten their tree. I mean, tell you something about everything up to a certain depth, and the depth that they can do is not much. The important part is the server has not no information. I mean, it gets it from n minus n to the 0.9. It gets it from most servers, but there's still a large number of servers from which it gets absolutely nothing. Then it's hard to make anything useful access. So more formally, if this is our noisy transcript, and we look at the next chunk of 0.1 log n things, then if the cutoff at the current time was k, then we want to say the expected cutoff after this new chunk is at most a log, an additive log n more. This will prove what we want. Let's see, questions here. We're doing it. 15 minutes. Okay, perfect. Great. That's perfect. Okay, so so here's the key lemma to make this following. If a party doesn't know the correct path up to a certain point, then it cannot, so the server in particular, then it can't give anything useful about these trees. I mean, if it can't guess this path, then there are many different trees here where it could give you information about. It can't distinguish between them. It can't figure out which one is the right one. So it can't actually give you much information about this subtree. So more formally, the information that a party can give us about the specific subtree that's kind of k further down, this is progress amount between the old cutoff and the new cutoff, is at most the probabilities that I can guess this times, say, total amount of information that I have about all of these things. And there might be some information that I have from prior rounds. There might be some extra information that I'm telling you about these things in this round. But if I can't guess this path particularly well, the probability that the information is going to be about the parts that we care about in the end, when we compute the new cutoff, is going to be small. And this is purely a statement about information theory quantities. Like this is just entropy, this is min entropy, the probabilities that we can guess something. And yes, so this you can make formal in a very information theoretic. Okay, so how do we use this kind of for the servers and the clients? Well, on the server, right, so what's the probability that the server guesses something that's further down? It almost has no chance. It says n to the 0.9 servers from which he has heard nothing, which could have a 0, 1, and if it wants to make a guess which one it is, it's just going to be essentially uniformly random, because before that he didn't know much about it. That's how the cutoff was defined. So the server can't do anything useful. Even just for the next step, it can't guess this next thing. So it might have some information about things before. It might get kind of, well, the n servers, each of them tells some log n bits of information. You might get n log n amounts of extra information here, which is fairly large. But because this probability here is so tiny, 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 even for the next edge, it's not going to matter. So the server is fairly easy. The clients are a little bit more tricky, right? Because the clients have binary trees. So what's the probability that they guess something that's like L down? Well, there's only 2 to the L different possibilities that they can guess. So even with a random guess, they're going to be right 1 over 2 to the minus length of how deep they guess down is of the time. Yes.
So wait, so in this, are you assuming throughout that like the priors are perfectly uniform? Do you not have to worry about
No. The priors here. There's some information that you already know about these things.
But even for the guess, you're saying.
Yeah. So you might have some tiny amount of information on this one. But it's not going to be uniform, so it's not going to be exactly this.
But you can assume.
But it's going to be fairly close to it. Right? Just by the way that we define cutoff.
Yeah.
So if this is a binary tree, then the probability that they guess the correct path, which is L down, is going to be 2 to the minus L. If it's exactly uniform, if it's a small amount of extra information known, then, well, this probability is going to change slightly, but it's not going to change much. So about this stuff, well, there's a little bit of stuff that's known before due to the conditioning. And they're going to get information from the server. How much? Well, 0.1 log n, right? Plus a little bit of something that's known before. So in order for this to be small overall, basically how large do we need to choose the lengths here? Log log. Right? I mean, it was something that's very short down, yes, you can just tell me about everything, or guess one, then it's going to be fine. But if the length is larger than log log n, then this is again going to dominate anything that comes in here, and we're going to be fine. Right? So this is, except that instead of these pretty pictures, you have to actually plug in some math. This is how the whole one, the impossibility result works. Right? So in summary, really, it's just formalizing these very natural, intuitive notions. And even though the proof essentially follows the thing, which is, if you look at it, you would straightforwardly say, well, of course this has to be true. If you want to make it formal, it becomes pretty nasty pretty quickly. And the problem comes from two things. One is this conditioning. Right? But you always have to condition on anything that happened before. The weirdest things can happen. Working with conditional entropies is just a pain. Right? So, and the second thing is, you if you do an induction, and in each round you're saying, I haven't learned much, but I might learn a little bit more. Then this leaked information might up during the induction or over time, essentially. And you need to control this amount of leakage. And you need to have the right definitions to have a robust notion of knowing which doesn't add up too much, but which is still strong enough to make these things go through. And so this is everything that I had to say about the multi-party case, and I want to kind of finish with any questions that you have, and then just go quickly over what are the open questions regarding rate, regarding the multi-party setting, regarding lower bounds. What are cool things to do in the future? Any questions about the results, about the idea, about how to formalize this? Okay, so then let's just quickly go over the open problem. So two different ones that relate to this talk. So what is the open problems with respect to the multi-party setting? So one thing is, we've seen that the star topology is pretty bad. Right? You can, the rate is going to be log log n over log n. Is it the reverse? Right? Is it true that we can always do this with log log n over log n, or are there actually topologies in which are worse than the star where the rate is really above log n? And right now we don't even have a good candidate. If you are with a binary alphabet over large alphabets, I said yes. If it's a log n alphabet, then we actually get the tight bound. But if you communicate bits, you don't even have a good candidate for which you don't have a scheme of rate log log n over log n. More generally, it would be nice to understand. So clearly, how the topology looks like influences on what rates we can achieve. And beyond saying that, it was worst of all topologies, like this is the best things that you can do, it would be very interesting to understand how does the topology actually, what makes the topology easy? Can we have more general upper bounds, more general lower bounds, which actually say, for this topology, you can only do so well. And that's both an upper bound and a lower bound question. For the two-party setting, essentially, we believe that we have the right upper bounds. And the right protocol. So the protocols we have is just this simple backtracking protocol. It's computationally efficient. It gets rate which go to 1 as epsilon goes to 0, but they don't go quite as fast as we are used to from the one-way setting. And we believe that this is inherent. Can we prove it? So proves that this rate loss gap is indeed quadratic. So the amount of overhead that we have is essentially epsilon for the one-way setting, but square root of epsilon for the interactive setting. So proof of 1 over square root of epsilon t low communication complexity lower bound for alternating input products. Similarly, all the other rates that we wrote down, those are conjectured to be best possible. So let's prove that. Let's prove that for a fully adversarial setting, this is up to the constant. This is exactly the rate that you can achieve. And for the case of non-alternating protocols, you always have to use a constant. So we have the upper bounds. The question is, can we prove the communication, the mentioned communication complexity lower bounds? And lastly, it would be nice. So the two things that we've shown you is we know for what rates we can achieve some constant rate. So what's kind of the limit where kind of constant rate stops and kind of nothing is possible anymore. And on the other hand, as the error probability goes smaller and smaller, we get a better rate, but it's also an asymptotic result. So can we prove some non-asymptotic results? Like Pixie, so unfortunately here the answer of what's the best rate that you can achieve might depend on whether you have an alternating protocol or not, whether you have private randomness, public randomness, or no randomness, and a bunch of model details. But picks the simplest, most straightforward model. Like let's pick, I think Mark already mentioned this. Let's pick something where we have public randomness that's hidden. We have alternating protocols. It's the nicest protocols that we can think of. Make your life as easy as possible. Let's just choose an erasure channel. This probability 1 perhaps 1/3. What's the rate that we can achieve for this? Or maybe not even the best rate, but what's a non-asymptotic rate that we can achieve for this setting? And lastly, it would be nice to take these techniques that we have built for communication complexity lower bounds and extend them to other settings. So circuit and resilient circuits is one setting. Another really nice setting would be to prove space lower bounds for branching programs. So branching programs is something that looks like this. It computes an output depending on a bunch of variables, and you basically just walk down this tree. You look at the first variable, is it 0, 1? If it's 0, you go here. You look at the third variable, if it's 1, you go here. And you go down and compute it. And the question is, how many of these how many of these comparison things do you need in here if you have a data access to compute a specific function? And it would be nice to say that, well, let's just see how much information. Can we pick a hard function and say, there's a certain amount of information that we need to learn in order to compute this function. So there need to be a bunch of these things in here. So the thing that's different here is that here we don't just learn stuff. So whenever we query a variable, we learn some new information. Once we kind of have nodes that have 2 inputs or multiple inputs, we're essentially forgetting stuff. So if you end up here, you don't really know did we come from here or did we come from here. You know that either x1 has to be 1 and x2 has to be 0, or x1 has to be 0 and x3 has to be 1, but we don't know which one it is. So here we're both learning things and forgetting things. So the question is, can we extend our definitions of knowing things, the information quantities that we have, to also take forgetting things into account, and can we prove that overall you have to learn and forget a good number of things to compute a certain function. And that would correspond to a space lower bound for branching programs. That's what I had to say. Thank you, guys. Any more questions at this point? Yeah, Nick.
So this is something very vague, but okay, so say I just have a general topology in which node has like degree delta. I can sort of think, I kind of think of the protocol just kind of the way you did, as like the pointer jumping game, like a 2 to the delta array pointer jumping game in some sense for each one.
Yep.
So implementing, just say like, essentially doing what the solution was for the server case, just like in each round, I send like log, I send like an error correcting code with like log delta depth of this tree to like all of my neighbors.
Yeah, you can do that, and if delta is smaller than log n, then get some kind of gain from it. If delta is larger than log n, you don't get a gain from it, because you can only kind of go flatten the tree out constantly far. And the bigger problem is, if that's the best that you can do, then, well, then we have the answers. There's kind of, if you choose random graph with a delta large enough, then we would actually get a lower bound, which is 1 over log delta. 1 over log yeah, 1 over log delta. The tricky part is to prove that this is the only thing you can do.
Yeah, I was trying to get the idea that like maybe it's different because you have, but couldn't you like the idea of just setting like log delta depth each time, so you get like the rate loss of log delta over log delta instead is like
in the case in the star case,
yeah,
the clients have the complete picture of the world. In general, you have multiple neighbors, so you don't. It's not like you know your future. Your future depends also on neighbors from the other side, kind of things. So
in the star case, even if you communicate bits only, right?
Yeah.
The clients have binary truths. Right? Which actually means that you can go reasonably far down. I mean, you can go log far down if you want to send log instances.
Right.
But if you have a graph which has, every node has degree delta, not you don't have these like degree 1 nodes. Then every node would essentially look like the third. Right? So in order to just know the next step, you need to know delta bits.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Right?
And the server want to know them.
And so you can extend this protocol to kind of trees.
Sure,
You start at the bottom, push things up, but yeah, if there are no kind of tiny degree nodes, then it's not the place. So the first thing to start is maybe pick a random graph with degree log delta, log n. N nodes, random graph, log n. Like or something that's not expanding, right? But yeah, so the flattening only works if you have a very small number of neighbors, because then you have a very small branching factor of the tree.
Yeah.
Good question. Other questions? Well, then, thank you again. If anybody's interested.